Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Worth It Then, Worth It Now, a side project that we're running over here on this channel where I have a look at games of yesteryear, at least 12 months old, but generally speaking it's a list of games that I find interesting that I think need a bit of a shout out again and a revisit. Maybe you missed them the first time around. So it's not contemporary releases, but I do line them up with sales where I can, and in this case we're looking at Homeworld Deserts of Kharak, which is on a, I suppose you could say, deep sale, like 75% off. Jeez, it's expensive though. For a game that's, what, 10 years old, almost? Asking high-end AA to AAA, my goodness, that's wild. So, well, there you go, you can get it cheap now. It's a cool game, I like it. It was kind of my first introduction to Homeworld, which I recognise is a bit of a sacrilegious statement, and if you ask anyone that's a super fanboy in this space, and make no doubt there are some pretty hardcore Homeworld enthusiasts, they will tell you that Homeworld 1 and 2 are pretty much the top tier of the series. I've gone back and played them a little bit. I haven't put in enough time to have a super huge opinion, but yeah, they're great. But from what I understand, as a sequel, well, I guess this is a prequel, actually, taking the Homeworld feel, which is this kind of pilgrimage across space, or you could abstract that more and say across an open unknown, sort of an Oregon Trail through space, where you scoop up resources and build out a fleet as you go, and it's essentially a campaign that revolves around your big snowball. I would argue is probably the mechanical spirit of Homeworld. I mean, there's intrigue and an interesting world story, and don't get me wrong, it's something I would love to make time to go back and check out. But this sets it as a prequel before they leave the planet and go on their space pilgrimage. They essentially do the same thing here, a desert pilgrimage. There's different factions, and you represent the ones that broke the big no-no rule from the other faction, which is you're not allowed to go into space. They're a bit more tribal. It seems to be drawing a lot of inspiration from things like Dune before the modern resurgence of Dune mainstream popularity. But there's an anomaly in the desert putting out a huge power reading, and you're part of a pilgrimage vessel fleet going through the desert to go and see what's going out there. So intrigue driving a trip over a long space. I think it's a very clever way to take the core mouthfeel from the first games, the originals, and transplant it into a totally different space, in this case, the desert. So I think it should be commended for that. It's really interesting and I like it. I really love the ship designs and the world designs, this sort of flat, industrial, closer to modern than future sci-fi. You can see, in the footage, the bases that they're loading up. It's all very concrete against the sand, loading docks and industrial warehousing type feel to it. So yeah, that's a sci-fi I really enjoy, and it's cool to see that come to life. So it holds up. It's really cool and really interesting. I played a bit of it dipping in for B-roll this morning, and I went through on hard, and I actually wiped on like the second mission or something like that. I got attacked from all angles, so the AI is a bit tricky. It's good. There's a bit of a challenge there. But then there's, I suppose, controversy. More locally, with this game specifically, it's recently got mixed reviews, and I had a bit of a look into it, and it seems that they must have done a free giveaway, or at least put it onto the Epic Store at some point, and through that, it's retroactively now requiring a permission install thing, and I can attest to that because the computer I was running it on didn't have Epic installed, so when you launch this, it just essentially bootstrap launched Epic and installed that. So people are upset about that, because, they choose not to use Epic, and regardless of your feelings about it, personally, I'm not that worried about multiple storefronts, but if you're making the concerted effort to boot this game up on Steam, a la you don't want to go over to Epic, it's a bit fucking rich to require like an Epic log on what is ultimately, in the eyes of many, the opposition. So it bears mentioning, some people are going to care, some won't, but that's why it seems to be getting recent negative reviews. There's a larger controversy, however, because this is developed by Blackbird Interactive, and I would argue in the, let's say, the vacuum, up until and including the release of this game, people thought, okay, yeah, look, they carried the torch well, because they weren't the original devs, they're new kids on the block, and like I said, all that coming up with a clever way of bringing the foundations of Homeworld into the different setting, the desert setting. So they all did that as a new studio picking up an old license. And I think that's to be commended. However, since then, Blackbird's done some weird stuff. And it's one of those things, you almost retroactively start looking at old things with a scrutinizing lens. Like, were they always unhinged? Or is this something that happened over the 10 years since, people changing and different power structures? So most notably, these guys did Hard Space Shipbreaker, which it hurts my soul even to talk about it. If you followed my main channel, that was one of my first real loves and my first real cautionary story of be careful hitching your horse to a wagon when the wagon can turn out to be a psychopath. I need to work on the analogy, but I did like a 200-part playthrough of early access Hard Space Shipbreaker, which if you're not across it, it's a cool puzzling engineering game. You go into these ships and cut them to bits and cut out their power cores and all that and try not to blow yourself up. So it's this very mechanically minded, engineering minded puzzle solver. And it's all set in the Homeworld universe. I don't think it really mentions it, but they still have that blocky ship design aesthetic that I love so much. And I don't want to get too sidetracked on Hard Space, but it's probably worth finishing the story. Right before they went into 1.0, they pulled a bit of a hard turn where they put story into it, and it was all this pro-union propaganda bullshit, and it was really unwelcome, and it annoyed me immensely, and a lot of the player base who were in there because of the pure gameplay functionality. And that raised a good question, and that was the start of me developing my absolute loathing hate for early access, being that, I became a fan. I was ultra invested in your game, and then you decided to jam messaging in there that wasn't really part of the deal when we bought the game in the first place. Anyway, Hard Space Shipbreaker could have been a wonderful game remembered forever, but it was doomed to obscurity because of fucking up its release with that stuff. They then went on to do Homeworld 3, which, look, if I was the coal mine canary seeing this problem coming in Hard Space Shipbreaker, Homeworld 3 is when it hit the mainstream. That game got absolutely bombed to shit. It has a terrible main story of rotating around a bit of a girl boss that just talks too much about her internalized feelings. So, like, they're trying to shift the audience, or their inner development team radically changed, or they got caught up in the modern zeitgeist of over-signaling. But regardless, whether it was there all along dormant or it was a new thing, they thought they were confident enough to make that move, and it was a massive misstep. So they pissed off the entire Homeworld community. And this is also coupled to the fact that while they have carried over the aesthetics, I still think all the ship designs and shit in Homeworld are really cool. Homeworld 3, they really dumbed down a lot of the mechanics, which doesn't faze me terribly, and I'm alright with a more simple game if it's still fun, but that was kind of the last holdout for the last of the Homeworld fans. So look, this has turned into a bit of a Homeworld series dot point brief as per Scarlet. I apologise, but it's worth mentioning when you dig it out. So yes, Deserts of Kharak, if you look through it with a modern eye, I do start to wonder, is this main character the beginning of an attempt to girl boss hard? I mean, none of us cared through the lens of 2016, but now retroactively, we look at it differently because of these psychopaths that are running the studio now. It's hard to say. It would be worth picking up all these games on sale on the cheap as you go along and figuring it out for yourself, because I still stand by the core loop of Hard Space Shipbreaker, and if I can bring myself to go back to Homeworld 3, I would probably enjoy the core loop of that. But yeah, Deserts of Kharak, really good sequel slash prequel slash passing of the torch to a new studio. I think they handled the IP incredibly well. Like I said, this was my first introduction to Homeworld, and it's just really wonderful. Still has the whole building up from your main carrier, a snowball fleet that carries from mission to mission. I don't particularly like save scumming in general in games. I would argue that it's kind of designed with save scumming in mind. Like if you did get bricked and lose a chunk of your fleet, that's going to hurt the rest of your campaign. Whatever, it's a design decision, and it's less about what I want and more about playing it on their terms. But I think it's really pretty, the cutscenes are really cool, and the whole world feel still holds up after playing it some more the smaller morning. So yeah, deep sale for an outrageously expensive game 10 years on. I still think it's worth checking out, and maybe you'll learn something about Blackbird and the history of Homeworld today. Again, I'm not an expert, but that's just my anecdotal experience with the whole mess over the last couple of years. Anyway, it was cool to come back to this, and I'm glad it still holds up. Team, I might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.